This
He
meeting
has
is
also
being
served as head of the
recorded.
Department of Pol Science and Dean Faculty of Arts, a Rotary Peace Fellow at Chulalongkorn University, Thailand, and a UGC Raman postdoctoral fellow at the University of Texas at Austin. He has published extensively in national and international journals and authored notable books, including Welfare Administration in Assam and the Autonomy Paradox. He has led several research projects with well-regarded policy contributions and has delivered lectures and presented papers at prestigious national and international conferences. Then we have Professor Pahi Sekia from IIT Guwahati. She's a professor of political science and she's a Commonwealth Scholar from McGill University, Canada, and an Indo-Shastri Fellow, having conducted research on gender and governance at Carleton University, Canada. She has also served as a visiting academic in Australia and held teaching and research positions in Canada. Her academic specialization include comparative politics, IR with a focus on security, insurgency, political behavior, identities, gender, and governance in the global south. Last but not the least, we also have Ms. Preeti Bora Marak from National Law University, Assam. She is a guest faculty of law at that university, where she has been teaching corporate law and intellectual property rights for over 2 years. She is also a research scholar working on an empirical study on the legal and structural challenges in the winding up mechanism of MSMEs in Assam. Her research employs an empirical and doctrinal methodology to analyze insolvency and winding up processes affecting micro, small, and medium enterprises with a focus on procedural inefficiencies, institutional capacity, and the effectiveness of existing legal frameworks in Assam. I would now like to call Mr. Goyal, the CEO from Assam, to begin the session, and also all the other panelists to join us on the board. Thank you. Yeah. You want to give a presentation, right? So you can speak from here also. Okay. Yeah. And so in case you need assistance to move the slides.
Wish you a very good afternoon. So we are come toward the last session of the conference. So really difficult to keep the interest alive, especially when you are at the fag end of the conference. But the topic is very dear to my heart. On the face of it, if you look into it, democracy for entrepreneurship and enterprise development, it looks like a very positive correlation. Maybe it goes hand in hand. But before I go to the presentation, I just like to draw your attention to two ends of the spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is autocracies. Another end of the spectrum is democracies. Autocracies, you might have two views. Somebody will say, no, autocracies means everyone needs to fall in line. There is coercion. So maybe it's a better atmosphere. Everybody will follow the rules and maybe development will come. But other end, people might say, oh no, you're not able to breathe. You are gasping for breath. So autocracies may not be the best solution for enterprise development. For democracies, logic 4 is maybe rule of law and equality in opportunities maybe creates a conducive atmosphere. And on the other hand, somebody might say democracy is like free for all. Nobody cares what others are doing. So maybe it is not again a very good environment. So let us go into like how democracy results into creating a conducive atmosphere for entrepreneurship and enterprise development. So I'd like to begin with a few features, like what is a democratic governance all about? Rule of law, public participation, accountability and transparency by the government and its institutions, institutional checks and balances, and above all, social justice and equality, so that people feel not alienated but connected to the system. What it results in? Its impact: political stability, fueling economic growth, transparency, social inclusion, including equity, strengthening of public institutions, and sustainable and environmental development. The rule of law, very important for any enterprise to develop. It protects property rights, make the contracts enforceable. Not you cannot foresee it in an autocracy. Definitely. Peace and public orders, safe long-term investment, as seen by both global and the domestic investors. Electoral trust reduces uncertainty. If the people are participating in a democracy, then for an investor who is looking from external point of view, he will see the country as a stable environment, having a atmosphere conducive for investment. Then finance accessibility is very important. Stable finance institutions, strong regulatory frameworks like we have SEBI in India, and electoral trust also boosts inclusive enterprise growth. And the infrastructure, whatever is created, whether physical or digital, is equitably accessible to all in a democracy, which definitely shall not result in an autocracy. So I've just tried to show it in the same thing in a diagram, but two lessons to learn. International examples. Ghana, when it transitioned to democracy in the early 90s, it became a top destination for FDI in the western part of Africa. Indonesia in 1990s introduced democratic reforms and their EMB, KPU was established. Grown by leaps and bounds in tourism as well as in technology infrastructure. A lot of IT company headquarters have stationed in Indonesia after that. The growth volatility in autocracies is very high. It may have a sudden economic burst, but not sustainable because there are no checks and balances. There is a succession crisis. Many autocracies have developed in the past, you know that, but due to the succession issues, they were not able to survive. While democracies have very low growth volatility, it is sustainable, it is equitable, higher FDI definitely, and stable and lawful transfer of power is very important. The EMB's role is to make lawful transfer of power in a smooth transition. And most of the states, democratic governments will try to incentivize entrepreneurship. Singapore's co-investment model, India has the Startup India, Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, all these schemes are like which incentivizes the entrepreneurship. The freedom of press, very important. It acts as an early warning system for any economic bubbles, keeps the institutions in check, and the leaders cannot take any catastrophic economic decision, without scrutiny because they have to face the wrath of the people every 5 years if they go to any catastrophic decision. There is a snapshot. I have tried to show it in GDP per capita. This is based on a EIU and IMF report. The per capita income in countries with higher democracy index is high. In India, the per capita is not the perfect solution because India, the population is high, but the gross GDP is definitely very high. India is the now fourth largest economy. And as I was reading an IMF report 4 days ago, there was a news in the newspaper that India remains the fastest growing economy in the world in 26-27 and 27-28 with growth rate projected at 6.4%. So this is the projection by even IMF for the growth rate of India. So definitely democracy has a major role to play in it when we go for creating a conducive atmosphere. So in a nutshell, if you see India's growth story, just to putting things in perspective from India's point of view, so far as democracy is concerned, India has an independent judiciary, makes contracts everything enforceable. So long-term investment possible, and due to democratic federalism, even the states like Telangana, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, others are able to compete amongst themselves, for the global investment to become tech hubs. We have a financial inclusion which has been recognized globally. People were really astonished when the Indians on the street started paying through mobile when the other countries were only paying through the cards. So India became a pioneer, by paying through a mobile phone, even to a street vendor. So this means the informal economy has gone. More and more businesses have become formal. There is access to digital credit, and the informal borrowings have also gone. So that means the investors know, even if it is a domestic investor, that they have access to stable financial institutions offering credit, which incentivizes the entrepreneurship. The ease of doing business on that front also, due to the digital infrastructure, a lot of things are going on, and we are transitioning to a place where our Be Ready index, which is likely to be published in September 26, should definitely get an upward shift. I just try to shift the focus to Assam, the state from where I am Chief Electoral Officer, state with 35 districts, 14 constituencies, parliament, to 126 assembly. Ours was, I will not say second, I will say the highest voting percentage in the normal size states, because Lakshadweep is very small. So we had the highest voting percentage. So that means participative democracy in Assam at its best. Almost 82% people voted, while the national average was around 60%, right? So taking election to the last mile, polling session near to the people, That really helped. Inclusive elections, participation of all ethnic groups, communities in the elections creates peaceful atmosphere. Violence-free conduct of elections, no repolls. It has led us to reap dividend in the tourism sector, like our Kaziranga National Park. Many of you must have heard UNESCO Natural World Heritage Site, where for one horned rhino across the world, only place on the globe where one horned rhino is found, because Africa has two horned rhinos. So just want to differentiate, right? And logistic arrangements made during the elections, especially in our riverine areas, proves our administrative capability to help the investors whenever they come to our state. And the result of that is very recent investment by Tata Semiconductors, 3 billion US dollars, 2,700 crores worth of plant. The only second plant in India outside Karnataka, which is coming up in Assam. So that is the level of confidence which the investors are showing in the state due to stable democracy. Our constitution provides strong legal framework. There are constitutional provisions for the election commission with the two central acts and rules framed by the parliament. It ensures independence to the election commission. It ensures that there are no arbitrary delays in the finalization of results of elections. There is predictability, so there is lower volatility in stock markets. There is transparency. There are candidate disclosures, real-time verification at the time of elections. There is institutional mechanism to share information with the public at large, to the political parties and the website. There are different apps where people can raise their grievances relating to different things. And this makes sure that there is reduced information asymmetry. So to the entrepreneurs as well as large. The inclusion, that means higher voter turnout, makes sure that there is stability. There is no labor unrest or less labor unrest or civil unrest due to this reason. There may be unrest in some parts of the country due to other reasons, but not due to non-participation in the democratic process. So, if I try to make a global comparison, there are similar MCC pillars available across the globe. Brazil has a very clear example of fiscal responsibility rules which prevent the state from ballooning debt to win votes during the elections. The neutrality of media, like in UK, there are strict rules which prevent the government from using state media to skew the economic sentiment, and there are manifesto audits which are available in Netherlands. But I will also try to flag one dichotomy. You might have seen, that in stronger democracies, you will find that there is a lot of salaried employment. People are running for salaried employment. So you will say, where is the entrepreneurship? Sometimes it tries to reduce the push to entrepreneurship, right? Weak democracies might have only high rates of subsistence entrepreneurship. But first and third point are very strongly related. Why? If you see the Indian context, the stability in the regime, the stable environment provided by the democracy has resulted in higher investment by both global and domestic investors, which leads to large scale employment of skilled manpower. And we all know that India is the largest house of skilled IT manpower across the globe. You name any part of the globe, Indians are there in the IT companies. You name top IT companies, the Indians will be CEOs in those companies across the globe. So the investment by the global and domestic investors has fueled the also creation of a skilled manpower database. That manpower is our strength, right? And sometimes the overall self-employment may be lower in some democracies, but the skilled manpower resource base is creates for the global investors to come, creating a conducive society also another outcome. So towards conclusion, since I have speakers after me, very learned speakers who will develop on different issues relating to this, my 5 takeaways from this is that by ensuring a smooth law-based transfer of power, it eliminates the disruptions to the emerging markets, the democracy process. The transparency prevents market panics, safeguards fiscal discipline, enables inclusive enterprise, and enables investment, innovation, making democracy economically productive. So that is I think at this note, I would like to end my presentation so that we can further discuss upon it as the more presentations come and during the Q&A sessions. Thank you. Now I will invite, since our friend from Netherlands is not there, I will invite Professor Pahisakia to please come forward to make her presentation.
Almost an afternoon. A very good afternoon to you all. I welcome you all to this session. I thank our CEO, Mr. Anurag Goyal, for setting the stage for the next round of discussions and also for laying out the broad framework of democracy and entrepreneurship. Thank you, all the panelists, for joining us today. I would like to look at democracy and entrepreneurship. I don't have a lot of economic indices to share. And also because I'm a political scientist and there has always been a tension about the prerequisites of democracy, whether it's like a chicken and an egg problem, which comes first, whether modernization comes first, whether industrialization comes first, whether commercialization and social communications come first, or political liberties and civil liberties should be the prerequisite of democracy, as well as the social indices should be taken into account. So I look at it from an all-encompassing framework without giving more weightage to the indices. So to me, an entrepreneurship is actually an inclusive entity, more looking at both the sociocultural aspects as well as political institutions. Before I share my thoughts on this particular theme, I would like to begin with some of the remarks on global democracy in general, because I have titled my talk or lecture, whatever you may call it, as Democracy and Entrepreneurship, Key Takeaways for India from Global Experiences. Our CEO has well laid out what India has achieved, or particularly what Assam has also achieved. But my concern has been, as a student of political science, to understand what could be some of the key takeaways for consolidation of democracies, which India is perhaps, but also in terms of deepening. So that's my take from the entire session. I look at it that way because we see in general there has been a debate on the decline of democracies in general, both in the established Western industrialized democracies as well as the global South. Those democracies that have been consolidated for a very, very long time, including India. So in India also, we are debating a lot about the degeneration of the institutions, particularly very important institutions. And I'm very glad to see, and I'm very glad to be a part of this initiative. And I'm deeply honored and thank the Election Commission of India for, establishing this particular interaction between me and us. Me are the people who are actually not very close to the bureaucracy, who are at the policy making in India. So this is, I think, one of the pathways to do that. So thank you very much for taking it forward. So I think it's important to look at the declines in terms of civic engagement that we see in today's democracy. Credible elections, although India has been doing very well. I begin with a picture, which is a Freedom House, highly criticized, but many of us are look at it not free, partly free, and free democracies in terms of many indicators. And some of these are very, very crucial and very, very, the fundamental indicators like voting, expression, and rule of law, and not just laws. By not just laws, we mean that individuals may have a legal but also a moral responsibility to obey just laws. But conversely, which is more important for us to understand, moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And I think it's a well-established fact of morality and justice. So I begin with that. So it's available on Freedom House website. You can have a look at it. It has been debated a lot because the indicators may not be very, very sufficient to look at it from different socio-cultural contexts. This is something that I pulled up from IDEA website, and if you look at it deeply, they have a lot of graphs to tell you, and these graphs are actually telling us about democratic performance and, across categories. And the categories that you see here, on this side, you have Western Europe. These are the performance of democracies in different parts of the globe, including South Asia. So it's a very, very useful way of understanding democracy. There are a lot of disadvantages as well, because there are a lot of missing indicators here. But nevertheless, to begin with, for example, we have representation, rights, rule of law, participation, and then there are a lot of breakups about representation, rights, for instance, access to justice, civil liberties, rule of law, which is judicial independence, participation, including civic engagement and civil society from across the globe. So you can have a look at it. Now, very interestingly, before I go to the next one, I would like to say that India exhibits mid-range performance across all the 4 indicators that has been taken into account. And it ranks among the top 25% of countries in elected government in terms of its elected government mechanisms. It really stood out for high trust in government institutions from 2017 to 2022, but we see a decline after that. So I think that's a very big concern for many of us, especially those who are doing a lot of groundwork with people, with communities who are especially connected with what we call the local democracies in India. This is a ranking that you will also find in the IDEA website, and a lot of ranking on these categories that I have just spoken about. And India ranks 73rd. I think we also need to deliberate on, because it's a high, one of the highest growing economies today, and a lot of things to learn from other countries as well in terms of the indicators. But yes, we are not doing, having a negative growth in all these aspects. Now, having said that, what do we make sense of the 2 critical pillars of democracy and entrepreneurship, which is the debate and the discussion for today's session? Now, I think before delving too much into the concepts, I will just have 2 key takeaways from the concepts. One, democratic innovation, citizen-centric governance. That's what I mean, or what I feel should be about. And the other one, which is entrepreneurship as a democratic tool, is perhaps inclusivity, community-focused institutions, not just in terms of economic and managerial institutions, but in the forms of all kinds of local governing institutions where communities are involved. For instance, resource management, resource management of the indigenous resources such as forests, etc., water, forests, and other kinds of institutions and resources. Another important aspect of entrepreneurship as a democratic tool is also reducing the dependence on state structures. And I think this is very, very important for us to look at and understand as far as India's democracy and its institutions are concerned. Now, does it really matter? What are these interactions, and how do these 2 sort of categories interact? Does it really matter? I think it does, because it's very important. We are looking at a time when we are trying to rebuild our trust in representative institutions. Well, elections are being held, that's electoral democracy, but deepening of electoral democracies is a big concern for many in the global south as well. The other question that we need to talk about is in terms of different ways to mitigate these kinds of challenges. One of the important examples that we can draw from is perhaps mini publics. I felt Japan is an example because I've been to Japan several times, and every time I go to Japan, I have something to learn from, whether it is the way the mini publics are being, people discuss even in the mini publics about issues like the nuclear policy, like national policies. So national policies and local policies, there is no distinction between the 2 when it comes to discussing in community-based organizations and also community-based groupings in some of these countries. So it's a very important way to look at how we integrate communities in terms of the managerial decision-making. So it's called the Shimin Tagokai, if I am correct in the pronunciation, where people also participate in terms of democratic innovation, especially in planning municipal programs. Now, emerging global trends, the other important question is about how do we learn from other examples? One of the examples perhaps is also from learning from the United States and Taiwan. Taiwan is one of the best examples if you look at it from an Asian perspective. Although it has not been recognized as a country but a territory, India recognizes Taiwan and has also its consulate perhaps. But one of the things that we need to learn from is something called regional decentralization from these countries. For instance, in the United States, you have the LAS, which is the Local Aware Sensing System, where community builds affordable pollution sensors for environmental monitoring. And this allows the citizens to raise the awareness and pressure local governments for action. In the UK, you will also find, which I found very striking, especially because I have a vested interest when it comes to potholes, when it comes to my drainage system, when it comes to my local government administration in a country in India, in remote corners of India. Fix My Street. This is a very, very important initiative. And Fix My Street allows citizens to report local infrastructure issues like potholes, broken streetlights, directly to the relevant authorities who then manage the process of fixing them. This increases the efficiency and also provides quote unquote transparency and accountability in the entire system. And it actually brings citizens very close to the governments. There's another thing I wanted to mention about Taiwan, if I have time during the last part of my presentation. How and what kind of applications, especially technological applications, bring people closer to the government officials and the bureaucracy, so that the entire government system is made much more easier for the people. And it's a very bottom-up approach. There's something to learn from Taiwan as well. The other important example that I thought would be important for us to learn is Brazil. Our CEO has also talked about Brazil a bit. There's another important takeaway from Brazil, how Brazil is widening public participation through something called Brazil Participativo. It's a Spanish. I'm not very good at Spanish, but I'm trying that. So it's a platform, an open source digital channel using softwares in city councils. These are city councils, municipalities, to centralize citizen engagement, which means it's turning upside down, engaging the citizens in terms of policy making and public consultations. So hence, we need to understand that technology in some way, in no doubt, technology is reshaping the lives of citizens for political participation. And there are a lot of global examples to draw from. Some of the best models and practices also is to understand from both the informal and the formal democratic innovations across sectors. And some of these are also the practitioner-led standards approach. One that I could gather is the company democracy model, which is innovative organizational techniques in public sector enterprises. And there has been a very important research, particularly in the context of India, the Ministry of Education, how we can use this model to reduce the bureaucratic delays and also, a lot of overabundance of work, especially when it comes to the tables in the bureaucracy. So how do we do it? By following this kind of a model, which is a company democracy model, instituting them in government ministries and also special departments. That's a very, very bulky and, look at diverse issues at a significant point in time. The other important point that I want to mention is decentralized and participatory self-governing structures, reducing the load on bureaucracy, which is a very, very important way of self-organizing structures. There are some examples from India that we can draw from, which is predictable legal frameworks, the single window clearance systems in action in India. And this is very important because we are talking in the context of Assam, and Assam is actually going forward towards not only the semiconductor industry, but also, startups, which is a very big thing. Yeah, 2 minutes. I will wind up in 2 minutes. Startup in terms of startups. So single window clearance system is very important so that we do not have a lot of bureaucratic delays. And review mechanisms is something that we can learn from South Korea. EU has something called the rulemaking process, which is something that we need to learn from EU, and data infrastructure from the United Kingdom. So these are some of the best practices. I will not go into the details of discussing because I believe that entrepreneurship is also about looking at the socioeconomic aspects. This is already out in one of my books. It's already out and published by Routledge London. So it's there. The data is already there. The NER basic facts. This is the cultural landscape, the socio-cultural landscape. So if we are to look at democracy and entrepreneurial innovation, I think this is the landscape we need to remember in order to understand what kind of innovations are to be made. The key learnings that I think is important is using participatory budgeting, keeping in mind the context and conditions, biometric registration, which is a very, very important aspect, mobile responsive election related engagements, inclusive education programs, I think mock elections, street plays, etc., in educational institutions, because we need to train a section of our younger generation in both democratic innovations and entrepreneurship. Then use of technology to facilitate voters with special abilities. I think this has been done in many countries, from home, voting from home is one of the recommendations probably would be to look at different kinds of formal institutions using digital platforms, tech-driven monitoring workflows, enforcement mandates shaped by legal frameworks. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that what's important for us to look at is that economic freedom of individuals is important, not just the firms. If we are to strengthen democracy through entrepreneurship, looking at it, both the sociocultural aspects, I'd like to end with just one note and a question perhaps, that do entrepreneurs really develop democratic mind and skill set than others or the employees, especially in today's context when the latter have access to knowledge-based economies? So I think we need to delve deeper and deliberate on this during our Q&A if we have time. I'll end with some of the pictures, the sociocultural realities that I live in. This is my heart and soul. I work, my ethnography, my work, my life, and this is what I have, I'm a part of it. And the changes have to be done in this context. This is what I mean to say. And this is a picture I just thought I would like to show you. My recent visit 2 days ago from Taiwan. This is the second visit to Taiwan. And I think this is my dream democracy and innovation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Pahisakia. It was really insightful, and I think will really invigorate us to ask more and more questions when we come towards the Q&A session. I'll now request Professor Jayant Krishna Sharma from Guwahati University. He will dive us into comparative study on the global best practices. 10 minutes.
A very good afternoon to everyone, esteemed panelists and esteemed delegates from all over the world. My topic is very interesting, that democracy for entrepreneurship and enterprise development, a comparative study of global best practices. Now, if we look at the present world, that this contemporary age in many ways defined by entrepreneurship. And across the regions, if we look at throughout the globe, as we have talked just now presented by Professor Pahi and Mr. Goel, CEO Assam, that what we find that in across the political systems and in democratic paradigm, entrepreneurial activity has emerged as a central driver of economic growth, innovation, and also social transformation. Now, what we look at here, that democracy and entrepreneurship are deeply interconnected and grounded in the same foundational condition of decentralized, independent, and autonomous decision making. That is very important. Here I have seen writings of some scholars of the globe, that David B. Adretz and Petra Mung, both are from Indiana University, USA, and Sagan University, Germany. They have studied a lot of on relationship between democracy and entrepreneurship, and they have opined that entrepreneurship supports democracy by promoting independent, decentralized, and autonomous decision making rather than control by the central authority, which is very significant. And if we look under that circumstances, what we find that a democratic society is characterized by liberal institutions such as free media, independent courts, competitive political parties, and protections of civil liberties. Now, these institutions actually what they do, they limit arbitrary power, they reduce uncertainty and enable individuals, voters, and different firms, if we talk about entrepreneurship, to operate independently of state. Now, in this regard, if we look at Hannah Arendt's view, that reminds us the freedom to think and act is fundamentally incompatible with totalitarian systems. And it is precisely this freedom that sustains entrepreneurial dynamism. So under that perspective, if we look at entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurship flourishes in very important grounds like transparency, accountability, and the rule of law, which is also mentioned by our CEO Goel. So electoral management bodies, therefore, plays a very key role. That these electoral management bodies, voters, entrepreneurs, regulators, and civil society organizations are directly affected by governance quality and electoral integrity. So EMBs in best democracies ensure what they ensure? They ensure free, fair, and credible elections that legitimate governance structures, electoral processes in a very significant way, and it affects various dynamism, including what I am forwarding here, trying to look at the achievements towards sustainable development goals too. And these SDGs are closely aligned with mutually reinforcing relationship between democracy and entrepreneurship. How? Because democratic institutions ensure political accountability, rule of law has already been said, and which create an enabling environment for entrepreneurial activities. Therefore, entrepreneurship in turn operationalizes the SDGs by translating democratic freedoms into various innovative processes. In this process, we may look at SDG 1, SDG 8, SDG 9, SDG 10 performances in India. And social and green entrepreneurship at the same time is very significant, and it further advances SDGs related to health, education, climate action, the goal number 13, and sustainable cities and communities, so on and so forth. Under these circumstances, democracy provides institutional foundations, which is very significant. Now, if we look at the global trends and emerging patterns, then what we find that historical and contemporary evidences illustrate that there is a kind of close relationship between democratic institutions and entrepreneurial outcomes. Now, if we look at history, then if we look at Nazi Germany under the National Socialist regime, a kind of systematic state control and enforced centralization eliminated entrepreneurial autonomy and dismantled democratic pluralism. At the same time, late 19th century USA, if we look back, the rise of powerful trust and big firms actually weakened the small businesses. And recent examples like Hungary, Turkey, show that as democracy weakens, alternatively, entrepreneurship also declines. Because of paucity time, I may not discuss in detail now, but these cases illustrate that when entrepreneurial autonomy is curtailed by authoritarian governance or excessive centralization of power, then democratic institutions also erode in cycle. So alternatively, we may look at some best practices also. It's already been discussed, and Professor Pahi was talking about Taiwan. So at the same time, if we look at Ireland, Ireland represents a best practice case of how a stable, accountable democracy fosters entrepreneurship. And also we may look at Chile. What we find, opportunity-driven entrepreneurship, which is a very important connotation. And Chile shows how stable democratic institutions, transparent governance, and accountable policies, such as Startup Chile, create a kind of supportive environment for these opportunity-driven entrepreneurship. If at the same time our friend from Portugal is absent, but in African continent we find various success stories. In African continent, we have seen that entrepreneurship performs best under democratic regimes, where democratic governance strengthens institutions, improve resource allocation, and enhances public good provision, which is best illustrated by post-1990s democratic reforms in countries like Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and so many others, with a kind of studies showing positive effects on entrepreneurship and financial markets. For example, in Ghana, what we find that in post-1990s, constitutional democracy strengthened rule of law and political stability, creating a kind of predictable environment that supports private enterprise and SME growth. In Kenya, we have seen that democratic reforms and competitive politics improved institutional accountability and market access. Similarly, in Nigeria, what we have seen that despite governance challenges, democratic rule has enhanced financial market development and entrepreneurial opportunities by improving transparency under various kinds of conditions where investors may find a kind of comfortable environment. So, okay, I'll complete. So under that perspective, if we look at various data, I have studied so many informations and data from all over the world, and data from Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, GEM, an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. They show a kind of high innovation intensity, strong startup ecosystem, and SME export performance is very much related with the processes of governance. So since the late 1980s, South Korea's democracy strengthened institutions, policy continuity, and accountability, fostering SME growth and entrepreneurship. Similarly, a kind of STEM entrepreneurship is being looked at in United States of America, which thrives not just from markets, but from strong democratic institutions based on constitutional safeguards, independent courts, accountable governance, and top universities that lower entry barriers, protect intellectual property, and incentivize innovation. India, which is a very large democracy and already being discussed a lot, that translates electoral accountability into entrepreneurial inclusion through policies like Mudra, as already being said by CEO. The startup policies like Startup India, which expand credit, reduce barriers for very specifically the first generations, women, and marginalized entrepreneurs, and strengthens grassroots livelihood-oriented enterprise within a rule-based, credible democratic framework. So if we look at India very specifically, it can be regarded as the qualified best practice case of demonstrating how a large and diverse democracy can translate electoral accountability into entrepreneurial inclusion. So democratic institutions have enabled policy framework such as so many initiatives like Mudra and Startup India, which we have already talked about, to lower entry barriers. That is very important. entry barriers is being totally be eliminated and expand across to credit at scale. So at the same time, if we look at these Indian experience, then what we find that it illustrates that credible elections and rule-based governance can convert political voice into economic opportunity. So political voice to be converted to economic opportunity, that is being a kind of connection between polity and entrepreneurship. So at the same time, Assam, our own state within India, also shows that, yeah, I'm concluding, that effective election management bodies build democratic legitimacy, foster trust and inclusion, and create predictable conditions that support grassroots entrepreneurship and across diverse and remote regions. As already in different sessions talked about local bodies, in Assam and in Northeast India, we have autonomous councils, and we have, as per 6th schedule of the Constitution of India, 10 6th schedule autonomous councils are there. In Assam, we have 3 councils: Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council, Dima Hasao Autonomous Council, and BTAD for Bodoland Autonomous Council. In Meghalaya, again 3. In Mizoram, 3. In Tripura, 1. So if we look at the situation of Assam and Northeast India, that the election process and the democratic connection between tribal, the indigenous system, and electoral voting system is very efficiently being done. And as already being said by CEO, that the participation of different ethnic groups, a kind of full support and participation in the democratic process, is a kind of very important thing to be studied. How traditional system of election, a traditional system of democracy is being connected with the very modern system of democracy. Therefore, this type of discussions, like organized by Election Commission of India, is being a kind of fruitful exercise to understand the present condition and to take action for better future. So many things are to be said. Because of paucity time, thanking all of you, I conclude my speech here itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, for laying out a global perspective on this aspect of entrepreneurship development. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Preeti Boramanak from NLU Guwahati. She'll try to capture the relevance of rule of law in the development of entrepreneurship spirit. My only request is, because the valedictory session starts at 1:15 in the summit hall, so we need to close this session at 1:05 max. So, Preeti, your time from 12:48
I'll practice, sir. I'll
to
practice.
12:58, so that we have 3-4 minutes for questions. We can't overshoot the time.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the topic of this discussion right now is democratic stability and rule of law in enterprise growth. And this is a very, very special case study, which is from the state of Assam. So if you look at the state of Assam right now, it is actually the gateway to the Seven Sisters, and it's also a gateway to the Eastern countries, that is the Southeast Asia countries. Currently, we also have the Act East policy in place, and a lot of investments have been done or have been made in the state of Assam from both foreign partners as well as the investors. Now, speaking of this particular, the topic or democratic stability or the rule of law in Assam, when we're speaking of this in abstract definitions or theory, it sounds fancy. But what is the practical implementation of it in the state of Assam? So especially in terms of the entrepreneurial growth. So moving on, when we speak of democracy, we are looking at the voter turnout. So this is the graph. Okay, so this is the Lok Sabha elections of 2024, and as per the Assam turnout, voter turnout, so we have at least around 82%. So specifically, it's 81.86%, 81.6%. The national average in comparison to Assam, so which is the highest voter turnout in the state of Assam. So basically, when we look at this graphs, the next graph is the panchayat, the local level elections. So when we look at this graph as well, the highest percentage, you're looking at the North Qatar Hills. Again, that's an autonomous council election. Then we have the least percentage, which is the Rabah Hazong Autonomous Council. That is the 2025 elections. So if you look at the average marks here, or the voter turnout, that's 85 to 68. Again, compared to the national average, so that's a good turnout. Now, when we speak of all of these graphs, so what do we actually understand here? The turnout or the participation, the people's participation is actually there in terms of policy implementation, in terms of participation at a enterprise and at the democratic level. Now, moving on. When we speak of democracy or democratic stability in this particular state of Assam, there are very, very, very important things that we need to look at. First of all, as an entrepreneur, when you're speaking of democratic stability or the rule of law, there are three things that you need to look at. All right. We are always looking at democratic stability in terms of the policy transitions. All right, feasibility of those policy transactions. So when we're speaking of elections, we have at least we have 5 years term, and then we have the next elections. So during that time, as entrepreneurs, when you're investing in a certain state, you're looking at stability and the rule of law implementation in the state. If there is no political stability or democratic stability, then what happens here is the investors would not invest onto the state. Yes. Now, this is what democratic stability on paper looks like. All of these points. Again, when you're speaking of stable governance, we are looking at the risk that are involved, the cost of capital, and then the investment. So the lower the risk, the lower is the cost of capital, and then investment is also there, right? Now, moving on to the rule of law in entrepreneurship and enterprise growth. There are few things that we need to look at when we are speaking of rule of law. There are legislative frameworks in place for the enterprise growth in Assam. For example, we have the Assam State Legislature recently has actually enacted the Ease of Doing Business Act of 2016. However, we do not have, there are certain gaps or policy level gaps that needs to be implemented in practice. All right. Now, when you're speaking of rule of law in entrepreneurship and enterprise growth, there are several things that could be applied to it in terms of practical implementation. For example, for an entrepreneur, what you're looking at is at the policy level, whether or not that policy would last beyond 5 years. When you're investing on something, or let's say on a state or onto an enterprise, or you want to set up a company, what happens here is you're not looking at a business for 5 years term. You're looking at beyond 5 years, let's say 10, 20 years. So for us as implementers or as executors who are implementing the rule of law, it's very important that the policy survives beyond 5 years term. So these are few things that we need to look at, all right, in terms of even judicial oversight. So after 5 years, let's say when the election terms ends, the policy again changes. So that becomes a risk factor. Yes. So there are several other things in terms of rule of law in entrepreneurship and enterprise growth as well. Now, moving on to the Assam, the case study of Assam. This is actually the economic indices or the numbers that we have, the facts and figures that we have for the state of Assam. They've invested a lot. So we have had two investment summits. One was in 2018, one the other was recently, just last year, 2025. And in the Advantage Assam Summit, foreign investors along with Indian investors have invested almost around 2.77 lakh crore, which is a lot, but they've only signed MOUs. Now, when we are speaking of it legally, the enforceability of it comes into place. So to what extent it is actually enforceable? Because there are, again, government approvals that needs to be seen. Yes. So these are few numbers that actually, you can look at. Now let's focus on the ground reality of Assam. There are only few aspects that I could actually, bring forth in terms of the enterprise growth or the practical implementation of it in Assam. So when you're looking at the MSME registration, which is the micro, small, medium enterprises registration in Assam, so here, if you're looking at the total registrations when it started in the year period between 2007 to 2015, so the total registrations was 14,000. Again, after that, if you look at the growth rate, so after that you had the second part with the second period, that is 2015 to 2020. So that's again, it was only online that I've started. So initially it was physical filing of the process, physical registrations, and then came the online registration. So after that, if you're looking at the GR of it as well, if you compare the thing, it's negative, that is -2%. However, with the IIIDEM registration that came into place, so it is very easy for any MSME or any entrepreneur to go ahead and register the same. You just need a PAN card or an Aadhaar card, and then you can go ahead and register it in the IIIDEM portal itself. Now, once the online registration is actually started, what happened here is you see the graph here. I mean, the percentage, 100% actually more. There were more registrations. So that's double the registration. After which, again, so this is the numbers look good when it comes to registrations of MSMEs in Assam. However, when you're speaking of the exit reality, all right, the practical implementation of what happens here is the exit is not actually structured properly in the legal framework. And currently, I'm actually working on my PhD thesis on this itself, the exit mechanisms that are available for entrepreneurs when it comes to MSMEs. So you can go ahead and register the same through the IIIDEM portal. But what about the exit mechanisms? So that's a legal gap that we have at the policy level. All right. That's also a structural gap. Secondly, so this is the reality of MSME entries and also the exit reality that we have. Now, I would also like to talk about the number of pendency of cases in India. We already know that there's a huge backlog of cases in India, right? So this is one such reason wherein investors might think twice whether or not to invest in Assam. So if you're looking at this data, so you have this number of cases. The total cases is 5,67,091, and civil cases is this much. Now, I do not have an exact data of the commercial cases here, but given the overall understanding of the graph, would an investor actually or an entrepreneur invest when you're looking at the litigation factor? It would take 10 years, it would take 20 years. So to what extent the entrepreneur would actually invest on the state of Assam? So this is one factor that we need to look at. In terms of vacancies of judges, there needs to be there is a infrastructure gap. We do not have enough infrastructure. We do not have the vacancies filled. We do not have enough public prosecutors in place as well. So for us to actually economically develop, we have to look at all of these aspects. It cannot just be okay at the policy level. You make the policies, but when it comes to ground reality, are we actually implementing it? And there are several other factors that you have to consider. So these are few things that we need to look at. Coming to the demographic dividend and all, we do have a high percentage of literacy. However, to what extent are they actually skilled? Yes, so that way these are the gaps. Just concluding my presentation here. There are a few things that we need to go ahead and implement, and we do have, in terms of policy level, we do have the legislative frameworks in place, but in terms of implementation, the judiciary and the administrative would actually need to work together to go ahead and bring investors in the state of Assam. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Marak. It was really insightful, and especially maintaining time, especially when we started late. So I think we have a time for a quick 1 or 2 questions to our experts, if one has any on the issue. Otherwise, I can conclude. Okay, you have a question, please. Mike. Mike. ऐसे ही बोलिए ना.
Have some mic.
So I know we are running out of time, so I'll be very brief.
You asked the question.
Yeah.
No narration,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Ma'am, the question is a clarification provided. So when we make a comparison with the other countries, say Taiwan and Japan you were talking of, looking at the size of Indian democracy and the diversity in it, I mean all the linguistics and all the diversity, how far is a kind of comparison possible, ma'am, or is it possible at all? Looking at the size of Indian democracy and the other democracies that you have brought in. Thank you.
Any more question? Otherwise, we can answer. Yes, the last one.
I'm NLMT from IIIDEM, sir. So just it's totally almost not similar to this topic. It's just in relation with Donald Trump coming in and 100% tariff on India. Has democracy taken a back seat? Considering India the largest democracy in the world.
I think I'll first like to answer the second question. See, this is a conference on democracy and election management. So let us keep policy decisions and other things out of it. Let Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India take care of the country's foreign policy. Let us not discuss it. So for the first question, I will request Professor Paisek.
Thank you. It's yours. Thank you for such a nice question. The graphs are not made by me. It's the IDEA international graphs. I used it for the presentation, and that's what I said. And I also said very clearly that, it's very important. IDEA has the 5 indicators that I have shown. And on these 5 indicators, representation, rights, rule of law, and, participation, based on those indicators, you're absolutely right. I mean, I also typically have this intriguing thing in mind that, if that is the kind of graph we are coming up, but overall, when I had a close look, the graph, you can actually cull the graph when you go to the data set and work on the data set. So that's what the graph shows. So you have to do a little bit of homework and then put all the indicators together. So it comes region-wise, and also there are country-specific indicators. Even within the country, if you look at India, when I looked closely at India, for instance, there was an indicator which said participation. So even within participation, there are variations in terms of identities like gender, participation in terms of gender, participation in terms of tribes, SCs, STs, even the indicators, the categories that is being accepted by the Constitution of India, legally accepted identities. So even that will have a variation. But what these graphs would suggest is the overall performance of democracies globally, also keeping in mind the region and country specific differences and variations. So for instance, we cannot say that China is one of the best performing countries today in terms of its infrastructures, in terms of its growth, but China has its own ways of looking at its democracy. But when you talk about with the Chinese about the local kinds of democracy, for them, because they believe in something called Confucianism, so questioning and the highest authority in China goes against the ideals of Confucianism, which is not the case in particularly India, because we have been following this for ages now, and now it has been constitutionalized as far as the Panchayati Raj system is concerned. But there has been a system of the Varna system where we have maintained the hierarchies, yet we have something called the Gram Sabhas. So, where it's a people's assemblies that we have adopted in various ways in a modern state-making exercise after India's independence. So I think these are the nuances of looking at the graphs and to understand using country-specific indicators, if that addresses your question. Thank you so much.
I think we are running. Okay, Charlie,
I
quick.
think you have talked about so much of the dependency. Today, last 10 years, we come across pre-mediation, conciliation, and arbitration, kick-started in India. That is the hope for the countries. So therefore, pendency will not create any bottleneck because so much of the reforms has come into picture. Thank you.
Yes. So I think before, so in the conclusion, I'll just like to mention, I think we all agree that democracy is definitely the way forward to create an atmosphere which is positive, which protects civil liberties, which protects accessibility and equity to all, and allows the entrepreneurship to come and set up his business or her business so that we can all be a partner in the development. So everyone agrees to that. There may be regional differences, there may be country specific differences. As the gentleman pointed out, maybe the same indicators may not fit all sizes. As we say, one size doesn't fit all, right? So we might have regional indicators within India. There are regional variations. There is variation between Assam and Karnataka, between maybe UP and Maharashtra. So there will be variations. So maybe average indicators may not work the best for us, but maybe the best state might be equal to Taiwan. So if we compare, maybe if I've not studied the indicators, maybe up to the academicians to tell us. But let us conclude by, I think we all accept that democracy is the way forward for enterprise development, and the EMBs, the election management bodies, have a great role to play by ensuring the lawful transition of power of election after election. So thank you, IIDEM and Election Commission, for giving us this opportunity. Okay. And last, I thank all the panelists and the 3 research fellows who are accompanying them for really helping us to put forward all these presentations. Thank you.